school, and my daddy is a police officer, and I like it when Joe Wicks is Scooby-Doo. Hi, my name is Lucy. Hi, my name is William, and we go to Primary School. And I like playing with the marble one. I like playing on the field with my friends. And my daddy works at the police. My mummy is a teacher.
I am Joshua, and I go to Nottingham Primary School, and my dad is a key worker, and my mum works for Boots, and I love the field. Whoa.
Hello, I'm Charlotte, and my parents both work for Nottinghamshire Police. My favourite thing that I've done at school so far is rounders.
Hi, I'm Leo, and my mummy and daddy work for the ambulance service as paramedics. They take people to A&E when they've had an accident. I have been at school recently, and my favourite thing has been weaving Eye of God. Here's a picture. That's all from me, and this message is to say stay home, stay safe.
Hi, my name is Ethan, and this is my brother Johnson. My mum and dad work for the key workers of police force. Our favourite thing at Nottingham Primary School is rounders.
Thank you, County Council, for keeping us safe.
People, all the key workers who are working during this pandemic. Thank you, Mum and Dad and the school. My favourite thing is so I can play with my friends.
Me. Thank you for Miss Lowe, and thank you for Miss Smith. And we had lots of fun with belly dancing and painting rocks.
Thank you for keeping our school open. Mr. Bancroft and the cleaners are all fab. I'll have a lot of special memories here.
Thank you to Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Pye, Mrs. Sheila, Mrs. Kayla. We've been painting, we've had ice cream, we've been outside, and we've even had Easter eggs.
Thank you for letting us in the school while my mummy cooks the dinners. We made fairy gardens, and we played on the bikes, and the teacher made it lots of fun, and we made lots of new friends.
My mummy and daddy work for the NHS. My mummy and daddy work for the NHS.
My mum and dad work for the NHS.
Our mum and dad work for the NHS.
My mum and dad are on the front line risking their own lives.
We want you to stay at home to help save lives.
We want to protect our family and would like you to protect yours.
This virus can kill anybody.
You may not have symptoms, but you could still be spreading the virus.
It's important to stay at home and help save lives.
Ranger Rob saying goodbye.
There is no doubt that without the support from Shared Lives carers, Joe's family would probably have ended up in crisis. But with the support of Julie and Yvette, the family do not have to cope alone, and they now enjoy quality time with Joe on a regular basis.
Helen and Mike's care has been fundamental to Daniel's development, safety and happiness, and my peace of mind. They have been sensitive to Daniel's challenges and needs, as well as myself and my family. I am now widowed, and their support is utterly essential to me and my other son in making sure Daniel's needs are met. I'm continually in awe and appreciation of the work they do for my son.
Chantal loves visiting Hayley. She says it's fun and exciting. She gets to spend time with someone her own age. Hayley's such a lovely friend to Chantal. The family now have time to go out for meals, walk the dog and just chill.
Family members closest to Sarah have been able to gain great comfort and relief from the fact that Sarah has found a new family where she is happy and enjoying life to the full. The support that Sarah has received from Kelly and Ross have given her own family the time and space for them to better cope and manage through the difficult times.
Gemma's support means everything to Sophie and I. Sophie loves staying at Gemma's and does a lot of different things when she's there, and she's very helpful too. For me, I have more me time, and we would definitely be lost without the support we get from Gemma.
I'm Gemma and I'm a Shared Lives carer. Started off being a foster carer for Sophie and then she turned 18. So I became approved as a Shared Lives carer so that I could continue caring for her. We take Shared Lives as a whole family commitment, and my husband Paul and my children Millie and Toby all see Sophie as part of the family. Sometimes we don't do anything special, we just do everyday normal family things. Millie had weekly horse riding lessons and Sophie used to come along and watch her ride, and she wanted to have a go as well. So I spoke to my Shared Lives coordinator Jackie, and Jackie gave us the go-ahead to try horse riding. Sophie absolutely loved it. It's really therapeutic, the bonding sessions with the horses. I was a little bit apprehensive about becoming a Shared Lives carer because I hadn't worked with vulnerable adults before, but the support and guidance I had step by step throughout was brilliant. If there was ever a crisis, I'm not alone. I've got support at the end of a phone 24/7. There's an out of hours number that we can call, and there's always a duty worker that's able to help and offer advice and support as to what to do. I feel really valued as a Shared Lives carer by Nottinghamshire County Council. The pay is really rewarding.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Kevin Rossant, the Vice Chairman of the committee. In the absence of Chairman Councillor Bruce Lawton, I would like to welcome you all for the first virtual meeting of the Governance and Ethics Committee, which is being held remotely. Members will be aware of the reasons behind Councillor Lawton's absence, and I'm sure all our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family. Can I call upon Councillor Kate Fole?
Thank you, Councillor Rossant. Yes, just to say, huge condolences from the Labour group to Bruce and his family. He really has been in our thoughts. And the committee won't, with respect to you, Councillor Rossant, the committee won't be quite the same without him, will it? Very much his committee. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Fole. Thank you, Kate. For the benefit of viewers of the live stream, I will now ask the clerk of the committee, Keith Ford, to list the other members and officers present. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Chairman. The other members present, as well as yourself, are Councillors Nicky Brooks, Steve Carr, Kate Fole, John Handley, Errol Henry, Rachel Madden, Phil Rostance, Andy Sissons, Keith Walker and Martin Wright. And as well as myself, we also have the following officers present on the call today. Marjorie Toward, Service Director, Customers, Governance and Employees. Nigel Stevenson, Service Director, Finance, Infrastructure and Improvement. Mark Davies, Interim Head of ICT. Heather Dickinson, Group Manager, Legal, Democratic and Complaints. Rob Disney, Group Manager, Assurance. Kaj Gatura, Group Manager, Procurement. And I believe Linda Walker, Solicitor, is also on the call.
Thank you, Keith.
Chair.
Agenda item 1. This item is to ask the committee to note the appointment of Councillor Bruce Lawton as chairman of the committee and my own appointment as vice chairman. That is just purely for noting. Agenda item 2. This is to ask members to note the committee's membership as listed on the agenda. So I think we're all okay with the members listed. Agenda item 3, minutes of the last meeting. Can I accept the minutes as a true and accurate record, please? No vote required. Thank you, members. Apologies for absence, Keith.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Bruce Lawton, as already mentioned, and Councillor Andy Sissons is substituting for him. I should have also mentioned, I did say that Councillor Madden was on the call today. She actually sends apologies for the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Agenda item 5. Do any members present have disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? I'll take that as no. Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item 6, financial regulation waivers. I'd like to hand over to Kaj Gatura to introduce the report, please. Thank you, Kaj.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report provides members with an update on requests to waive the financial regulations in the period the 1st of April 2019 to the 31st of March 2020. It also informs members about the request to waive the financial regulations due to the COVID-19 response. The Council's financial regulations are set out as procedures and standards for financial management. However, there are occasions where it's not practical or possible to procure contracts in accordance with the contract procedures. And therefore, in these instances, officers may seek exemption through a waiver. In 1920, 25 waivers requests were received, and the detail of these are outlined in Appendix 1. During the COVID-19 outbreak, the Council's efforts were focused largely on the response to the pandemic, and therefore planned commissioning and procurement activity was paused. As such, there was an urgent need to extend contracts that were due to expire and issue direct awards for some services to ensure continuity of service delivery, and these are detailed in Appendix 2. Category managers in my team have started work with the directorates to develop compliant contracts as the Council moved towards the recovery stage. And every effort is made to ensure waivers are kept to a minimum. Through this report, members are updated of the detail of spend coming through the financial regulation waivers. I'll stop there for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaj. I formally move the recommendation, which is included on page 10 of the agenda pack. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'll second that, Chairman, and reserve the right. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite members to share their views and questions, please, for Kaj. Have we got any? Councillor Kate Fole.
Thank you. I didn't know whether you wanted the electronic hand or the real one.
It doesn't matter. Any Kate.
Hand will do it. Okay, that's lovely. Yes, thank you. First to say about the waivers, we are really concerned about some of these. There seems to be an awful lot now. I understand under COVID that you couldn't mess about, and if something needed to happen quickly, it needed to happen quickly. I absolutely accept that, and I'm sure that was all fine and above board. But in the recommendations, it says that the continued progress in keeping waivers to a minimum, and it does seem to be that you're struggling a bit with that with some of them. If I could just pick out one or two. There's one in particular that's leapt out at me, which is number 18 on the yellow pages. Procurement of several urgently required service on behalf of Midland Engine, £180,000, and no alternatives available. A bit more understanding of that would be helpful. The other thing that leapt out at me was the number of retrospective waivers requested that were refused, and most of those seemed to come from the Place Department. And I just wondered if there's an issue there around people who are commissioning stuff in the Place Department, whether they understand the financial regulations in the county, because it's really common, isn't it? A lot of these waivers were in the Place Department. Okay, just one other thing I would do. I'm a little bit concerned, and I raised this in a committee earlier today, when you're faced on a committee like this is generic and across the whole council, which it is, for good reason in some cases, you end up not being able to understand it because you've not got the context. And I really wonder if with these waivers, if these really ought to go to Finance Committee, where they understand the context, where they'll understand where some of these contracts have come from, and they'll understand what's going on around them. I don't sit on that committee. And picking it all apart and kind of going through it all and trying to do that bit of research would be very timely, and I don't think it would be very effective. So I just do wonder whether this should, when the waivers are at this kind of level, which is, I think is quite high now, whether this is really the right place to bring them.
Thank you, Kate. Kaj.
Okay, thank you. So the numbers and the value of the waivers this year are considerably higher than previous years. I think there's a number of reasons for those. We've had some real complex children coming into the system that have needed significant, complex and expensive packages of care that needed putting in. You've highlighted the one around Midlands Engine. There's been some funding that have come in from central government to do the work around the Midlands Engine, the Toton work and the Development Corporation work. The difficulty we've had is that funding has come in very, very tight. So by the time we've had that funding, processed that and had to issue some sort of tender or make that transaction, that's been really difficult on the tight timescales, particularly around the work around the visioning and the development of the Development Corporation. So those were some really key situations to get those projects moving. I'd hope that going forward, obviously, we've got a really clear programme of work around Midlands Engine. There's a dedicated programme team. All the work that's coming through now is part of the procurement pipeline as we're moving forward. Those are planned procurements that are coming through from the Development Corporation. In terms of the Place Department and retrospective waivers, we had a few gaps of key roles in that department, and I think what was happening is from a staffing perspective, there were retrospective waivers coming through. So there's a lot of work I've done with their group manager, together with the group manager for HR, to remind them of the financial regulations, the HR processes, and say, actually, we can't have these waivers coming through in this way, and let's look at a different way of making sure that services are commissioned, or if consultants and things are being brought in. So we have addressed those issues, and we did abide by the financial regulations, and those were rejected. And then your final point about making sure that Finance Committee do receive these. So I have sent this report to Councillor Jackson as the chair of the Finance Committee, and it's something we can continue to do going forward, and making sure that I've put more context around the detail. I mean, I try to summarise it as much as possible, bearing in mind it is a public document, so I've got to just be mindful of what information we have in the public domain.
Thank you, Kaj. Are you happy with that, Kate?
Sorry. Yes, largely. Around the Midlands Engine tender, where would that go to be discussed in detail in terms of the policy and the visioning that you described?
So I would have thought that it would go to, so any procurement that's coming through would be either at the Place Committee. And what we've got now going forward is all the procurements that are linked around the Development Corporation, and any further Midlands Engine work we've got in a procurement pipeline. So I'm due to bring a procurement pipeline report to the Finance and Major Contracts Committee that will show all the procurements we've got planned over the next 12 to 18 months, and that's due September, October, that I'll be bringing that to Finance and Major Contracts. And I guess depending on the project that will be coming through, there'd be the appropriate committee or governance structure that would those reports would go to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaj. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm quite happy with this report because quite a few of them have been rejected, and it's good to see that not everything is automatically rubber stamped said, yeah, okay, let's go ahead. With regards to the Midlands Engine, and this might help Councillor Fowle a bit, the work of the Midlands Engine has not stopped during the pandemic. If anything, it's accelerated. And the reason for that is because the initial consultation with regards to the totem delivery is October, because the government had brought it forward because it's seen as a key site for employment within the borough of Broxton, of course, within the county. So it is absolutely necessary that this work continued, and you know, the borough council and the county council have been working hand in hand to produce a plan, our own plan, so that we are not left out of being influencers in the final plan. So I'm very, very comfortable that the county spent this money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Handley.
Thank you, Chairman. I share Steve's view. Considering the situation we're in, I think they've done a phenomenal job in making sure that things didn't slip under the carpet. And there are things that have been rejected that should have been rejected. And I think in terms of numbers, I would have expected quite significantly more number of waivers. But if you look at the number of waivers we've had in the past few years, I don't think this is a problem. I'm certainly happy with the report.
Thank you, Councillor Handley. Anybody, any further speakers, please? Well, thank you on my behalf, Kaj. I think you've done a wonderful job, and the team have done a wonderful job, and pass my personal thanks back, because we've never been in this sort of position before, and you've kept the wheels going. So a wonderful work by your team. So thank you very much indeed. We'll now go to the vote on the recommendations included on page 10. Members of the committee to consider the detailed contained in the report and continued process in keeping, this is a vital part, keeping waivers to a minimum in order to make the voting clearer on this item and the others. Keith will read out members' names. So if you could call the members' names, I think you're doing it alphabetically.
Yes, certainly, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you,
Keith.
Keith.
Can I just clarify that the votes today will not be recorded in the minutes of the meeting like a normal recorded vote unless 2 or more members request it. So that this is basically a roll call following the normal pattern that we do for recorded votes. So starting with Councillor Nicky Brooks. Councillor Steve Carr.
4.
Councillor Kate Fall.
4.
Councillor John Handley.
4.
Councillor Errol Henry. Sorry, Councillor Henry.
Sorry.
I think you're just
Sorry,
muted.
4.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Kevin Rostons.
4.
Councillor Phil Rostons.
4.
Councillor Andy Sissons.
4.
Councillor Keith Walker.
4.
And Councillor Martin Wright.
4.
That's unanimous, Chair. 10 votes for.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to agenda item 7, statement of accounts and accounting policies. Can I hand over to Nigel Stevenson to introduce the report, please? Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, and this is a report that we bring every year. The statement of accounts includes a section explaining the accounting policies that have been used in producing the main statements for the benefit of the reader. It is considered best practice by both SIPFA and external auditors that these policies should be reviewed on an annual basis and approved at the appropriate level. Other than various dates in the accounting policies being updated and a minor amendment to the capital de minimis threshold, there have been no further changes to the accounting policies from the previous year. Governance and Ethics Committee are asked to consider the accounting policies used to produce the 2019-20 Statement of Accounts and recommend that the updated accounting policies are submitted to Policy Committee for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. I formally move the recommendations, which are included on page 22 of the agenda pack. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'll second those, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Oh, sorry. I would now like to invite members' views about this report, please. Thank you. Thanks very much. What? No speakers. Right. Sorry, Councillor Wright.
You're just muted, Councillor Wright.
You're still muted, Councillor Wright. Councillor
Sorry.
Wright.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah.
You're on now.
You
Thank
can
you,
hear
Martin.
me now.
I can hear you now.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Can Nigel explain, please, what accounting policy 8 actually means to someone like myself?
Thank you, Martin. Nigel.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't think you were going to get into the technical question, but that's very good. Yeah, so it determines whether we recognise it on the balance sheet or do we have to recognise the transaction on the revenue account, and that sets us the de minimis amount by which we can capitalise, and then once we put it in the balance sheet, then we'd actually do depreciation or amortisation depending on the nature of the spend. I bet you, yeah. Bet you wish never you asked.
That's really made it clear.
It's just about the nature of the spend. Is it capital spend or is it revenue spend? And above a certain amount, which in case of community assets, the £10,000 means it's capital. And if it's capital, then we can borrow against it.
Yeah.
Yeah. As opposed to revenue, where we're just using the revenue spend.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions for Nigel? No. We'll now move to the vote on the recommendations included on page 22 of the agenda pack, which states 1, that members consider the proposed changes in the authority's accounting policies, and that members recommend the updated accounting policies to the policy committee for approval. Again, I will ask Keith to read out members' names alphabetically to confirm their votes. Thank you. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you. Councillor Nicky Brooks.
4.
Councillor Steve Carr.
4.
Councillor Kate Fore.
4.
Councillor John Handley.
4.
Councillor Errol Henry.
4.
Councillor Kevin Rostance.
4.
Councillor Phil Rostance.
4.
Councillor Andy Sissons.
4.
Councillor Keith Walker.
4.
And Councillor Martin Wright.
4.
Thank you. Again, that was agreed unanimously, 10 votes for.
Thank you, Keith. Agenda item 8, informing the audit risk assessment statement of the accounts for 2019-20. I'm going to hand over to John Gregory, who's keen to do an introduction. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to introduce myself for starters, my name is John Gregory. I'm a director with Grant Thornton, the County Council's external auditors. This is another fairly technical document which is produced as part of the whole sort of accounts and audit cycle each year. Essentially, we are asking that the committee considers this document and highlights any further actions or information required at this stage. What the document does, it's part of our audit planning process. It's part of a process that we use with all of our clients to fulfil a need that is set out in auditing standards, which are effectively our book of rules. Whereby we have to consider and document your arrangements in a range of areas. So, for example, your arrangements for prevention and detection of fraud, your arrangements for considering going concern, your arrangements for related parties, and so on. So each year we give this document to your officers to consider and to update as appropriate, and then we bring it to you for information. And we're not expecting you to be able to sort of endorse every last paragraph and sentence within this document. What we're looking for from you is to know that, to the extent that you are aware, this document does actually give a fair picture of what the arrangements are in place at the council. We also bring it to you simply as a way of keeping you informed in your role as members of this committee on these arrangements. I think that's probably all I need to say about the document, but quite happy to try and answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, John. I formally move the recommendation, which is included on page 42 of the agenda pack. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, Chairman, I'm happy to second that and reserve the right. Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite members who wish to speak. Have a show of hands, any member that wishes to speak, please.
Councillor Fall is indicating.
Councillor Fall.
Thank you. Just to say thank you. it's a very reassuring report, this one, especially considering what's been going on in terms of the COVID pandemic. And I think thank you to you and to the audit and to the finance teams who've kept us going in such a good way. And it's really good to see the going concern report at the end, which is very particularly reassuring, especially given what's gone on in other counties in the past. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Any further speakers, please? No, that's fine. We will now move to the vote on the recommendations included on page 42 of the agenda pack, which states that the committee considers the informing audit risk assessment. Again, I'll ask Keith to read out the vote as follows.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Nicky Brooks.
4.
Councillor Steve Carr.
4.
Councillor Kate Fall.
4.
Councillor John Handley.
4.
Councillor Errol Henry.
4.
Councillor Kevin Rostance.
4.
Councillor Phil Rostance.
4.
Councillor Andy Sissons.
4.
Councillor Keith Walker.
4.
And Councillor Martin Wright.
4.
Again, Chair, that's carried unanimously, 10 votes for.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Keith. Agenda item 9, Local Code of Corporate Governance and Annual Governance Statement. I'd like to hand over to Rob Disney to introduce the report, please. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Chairman. This report seeks approval to the draft annual governance statement for 2019-20, which must be published alongside the financial accounts of the County Council. The report also considers whether there are any changes needed to the Council's local code of corporate governance. Our governance statement presents an assessment of how well that local code has been complied with over the past year, and the evidence gathered for each element of the code is set out in the statement, and it shows a positive assurance for all aspects in 2019-20. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is acknowledged both in the statement itself and in the covering report. Although the pandemic hit towards the end of the financial year, it was undoubtedly a significant event for the governance framework of the council, and it also had some impact this year on the preparation of the statement itself. CIPFA issued specific guidance around that because I think they anticipated some of the issues that authorities might have around preparing the annual governance statement this year, and that's been followed closely in preparing that statement. Most significantly, I think, for us is that the statement should reflect the governance position of the council at the time that it's published. Now, that may mean that some changes are required to reflect any further and significant impacts as the course of the pandemic continues to develop, and the report sets out a proposal for dealing with that eventuality. No changes are proposed to the local code at this stage, but again, I think that's something that will need to be kept under review as the emergency and the council's recovery from it continues to unfold. And the regular governance updates that come through to the committee as a result of this statement, you'll know that it's something that we bring through the action plan and the progress against it on a regular basis to the committee. I think that will present the ideal opportunity to keep that code under active review as we go through the rest of the year. So the statement is recommended for approval along with the proposed arrangements for updating it if that is required to be the case prior to its publication. And I'd be happy to take any questions or comments, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Any members wish to speak on this item, please? Councillor Fole. Kate. Steve, I've got you, Steve.
Sorry, me again. Yes, thank you for this, Rob, and it's really good work. Thank you. Yeah, I know you do a really good job for us. Great. And you explain things really well, so we understand it, which is even better. So thank you. Just a couple of things just to raise. Under the compliance, where am I going? I'm on page 96. Under the review of compliance, that page there, there's a piece about member training. It talks about unconscious, but I'm on the right report, aren't I? Yeah. Have you got it? Yeah.
I'm just getting there. Yeah.
Okay. That member training, it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be impacting on as much, does it? It's not very visible. I wonder if you could do more to encourage more good quality training and for more members to do it. Really, I think that would be quite helpful. And just one other thing I wanted to raise as well. Oh yeah, Page 104, no, page 104, or is it actually page 13, 105 in the yellow pages. It talks about the committees coming back and actually kind of a programme coming back. I wondered how far we got along the lines of perhaps having hybrid meetings, whereby people who felt comfortable and able to come to meetings in the council chamber could do so, social distance of course, but those that felt unable to, or perhaps lived a long distance away, or were a bit more vulnerable, could actually kind of participate on screen. I wondered how, if any, plans have been made to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Rob.
I wonder actually on both of those issues if I might hand them on actually, because in both respects I think there are people on the call who are better placed than myself to answer those, and I see Marge has stepped in there. Thanks, Marge.
Okay, so the first thing was about the members training programme. We've said in here we're going to bring a report. We thought we'd bring you, we've had a bit of a review and we thought we'd bring you a more detailed report in September, but particularly we've had discussion in other committees about unconscious bias training for all members and making training mandatory. So we're going to bring you a more comprehensive report in the autumn, in September, on that. So if we can follow that up then. And the thing about the hybrid meetings, Councillor Foles, so that is something colleagues in Democratic Services, I'm going to let them have a week off after all the committees have finished, and then they're going to start work on looking at hybrid meetings and looking at how we would run them, because obviously if you work in Democratic Services, one might want to argue that they're the worst of all worlds, because you've got to have the Teams aspect working and the people in the room aspect working. So I think that needs to do a little bit of work on that to make sure we've got that sorted, because I think you're right, that will be something people will be keen to have that as an option, I think, going forward.
Are you happy with that, Kate? Are you okay with that, Kate? Thank you. Councillor Carr, Steve.
Just to follow on from what Marge just said, I think this is an ideal opportunity to have the best of both worlds, because one of the things that's been avoided by doing meetings like this here and at district and borough councils is that we're not all whizzing around in our cars burning fossil fuels. Yeah. And I think that needs to be a big, factor in what decision we do come to. Although it is nice to meet face to face now and then, I accept that. Yeah. What I was going to actually point was on page 88, where we're talking about behaving with integrity, demonstrating strong commitment to ethical values, etc. And it's a bit of a plea from me really, because there are two things. In the top section, there's a point which says maintains the council's constitution, setting out how decisions are made, etc. And then underneath that, it says sets out its shared values and its strategic plan, treating people fairly. I have to say, and I'll say this here because if I ever bring it up at full council, then I get heckled, is that I don't feel fairly treated as a councillor that's not in a group. I am not taken into account with regards to proportionality, neither is...
Sorry, Councillor Carr, we've lost you at that point. I think you might have muted yourself. Sorry.
Well, I don't know, I did that. Where did I get?
Sorry.
I was saying
mentioning Councillor Dobson, I think. Steve.
Oh yeah, Councillor Dobson feels the same as me as well. And I have done that. I have done some research of this, and I can't actually find from the councils that I've looked at another council that treats people that are lone councillors the same as this council does. I should really be on probably 4 committees, given the number of councillors that now sit on committees, but I'm on just this one, and that's the same for Councillor Dobson. So when we're talking about fairness, I think we all should be considering fairness to all councillors as well.
Thank you, Steve. Marge, I don't know if you want to address that or give some clarity to that, Marge.
Yeah, I mean, we allocate obviously the places to committees in line with what we understand to be the rules, and I'm not aware we do it differently to other people, but I'm happy to have a look to see if other people do it differently and if there's something we can learn. But as my understanding is we're doing it in the right way. But happy to have a look at that, Councillor Carr.
Are you happy with that, Steve? Is that? Yep.
Well, have a look at Broxtowe there, Marge, because they do it very differently.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Steve. Councillor Brooks, Nikki.
Thanks. It was just a comment about the hybrid meetings. I know that some of the more rural county councils do have hybrid meetings, so there's obviously a model out there. So it was just sort of asking if you're going to be looking at speaking to the councils. I know Cumbria, for instance, do a lot of hybrid work, so just a thought.
Yeah, that's really helpful, actually. I hadn't thought about that point about looking at rural ones, because they'll have had to find a way to make that work. So, yeah, happy to have a look at that, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Nikki. Any further questions, please? No, can I just thank you, Rob, for all the work you've been doing. It was quite remiss of me to not thank Nigel Stevenson for all the work, because it's been absolute bedlam. And the work that you've both been doing is tremendous. So thank you again on our behalf and the committee's behalf, because you've been kept really, really busy. And thank you very much indeed. We'll now move to the vote on the recommendations included on page 84 of the agenda pack, which states that the committee approves the annual governance statement for 2019-20 and makes any comments or recommendations which it agrees ought to be included in the statement. And 2, that the authority be delegated to the Chief Executive in consultation with the Leader of the Council to make any updates required to the annual governance statement prior to its final publication in November 2020, with any significant changes reported back to this committee. Could you please take the vote, Keith?
I can do. Thank you, Chair. Starting with Councillor Nikki Brooks.
For.
Councillor Steve Carr.
For.
Councillor Kate Fall.
For.
Councillor John Handley.
For.
Councillor Errol Henry.
For.
Councillor Kevin Rostance.
For.
Councillor Phil Rostance.
For.
Councillor Andy Sissons.
For.
Councillor Keith Walker.
For.
And Councillor Martin Wright.
For.
Again, Chair, that is carried unanimously, 10 votes for.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Keith. Agenda item 10, Head of Internal Audit's Annual Report 2019 and 2020. Can I hand over back to you, Rob?
Thank you, Chairman. Yep. This report brings to the attention of members the annual report of the Head of Internal Audit and provides an opportunity for members to request any follow-up actions and reports that you'd like to see. Our internal audit team carries out its work in compliance with the public sector internal audit standards, and a key feature of that is for the Head of Internal Audit to produce an annual report, which is the one that you have in front of you today. I deliver that Head of Internal Audit role here at Nottinghamshire, and members will know that I report the key findings from the team's work regularly throughout the year. All of those termly reports build then towards this annual report. And I think this is a significant plank of assurance that comes through to the Governance and Ethics Committee each year. The report for 2019-20 is attached, setting out my annual opinion on the effectiveness of the Council's arrangements for governance, risk management and control. And I'm pleased to say that positive opinions are presented for each of those 3 elements this year. The report also confirms the arrangements for the delivery of the internal audit service, and I think it's important that you receive that assurance, in particular that around its continuing independence in the organisation. I've also included in there an update on the service's performance metrics and along with the refreshed quality assurance and improvement programme for the service. So the report is commended for members' insight into the effectiveness of the Council's governance arrangements, and I'll be happy to pick up any questions members have about the work of the internal audit team. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rob. I formally move the recommendation, which is included on page 112 of the agenda pack. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Chairman. And I'll just make a comment that although I'm not officially on this committee anymore, I do recognise the work that Rob Disney and his team put into auditing everything, and I think they do an excellent job. And they're very quick to flag up anything that needs attention, and it's good to be in the hands of such a good team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sisson. Thank you, Andy. Any further speakers, please? Shall we keep the same order, Councillor Fole?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just to say thank you to Rob. I think he does a really good job, and this is a really good report, and it is much more digestible and understandable than when you first presented it, I have to say. It's got much more member friendly, which is very much appreciated. So thank you for engaging us in that way. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Councillor Fole. Councillor Steve Carr.
Yeah, just wanted to say on page 121, item 22, as an opposition councillor, credit where credit is due, I always believe in. And the children's services obtaining a good overall rating is good news. That hasn't, as we're all aware, hasn't always been the case. So in these difficult times, I think it's exceptionally outstanding that we've maintained this position.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Any further speakers, please? No. We will now move to the vote. On the recommendations included on page 112 of the agenda pack, which states, arising from the content of this report, members determine whether they wish to see any actions put in place following or follow-ups brought up in the future meetings. Again, I'll ask Keith to take the vote, please. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Chair. Starting with Councillor Nicky Brooks.
4.
Councillor Steve Carr.
4.
Councillor Kate Fole.
4.
Councillor John Handley.
4.
Councillor Errol Henry.
4.
Councillor Kevin Rostance.
4.
Councillor Phil Rostance.
4.
Councillor Andy Sissons.
4.
Councillor Keith Walker.
4.
And Councillor Martin Wright.
4.
Thank you again, Chair. Carried unanimously.
Thank
10
you,
votes
Keith, and thank you again, Rob. Thank you. Agenda item 11, update of the National Audit Office Cyber Security and Information Risk Guidance for the Audit Committees. I'd like to hand over to Mark Davis to introduce the report, please.
Hello, thank you, Chair. This is an update on the National Audit Office Cyber Security and Information Risk Guidance for Audit Committees, and it's to provide members with that update. The report only deals with the exceptions where we've gone from 1 state to green, so I will go through and deal with those 4 points separately, and obviously can take questions at the end. In the table, section 3, has the organisation implemented a formal regime of structured approach to cybersecurity which guides its activities and expenditure? Answer to that is now green, in so much as we have a formal IT security strategy which is reviewed and produced annually, and within that includes compliance and best practice for our security shadow controls and informs our security activities in terms of what we will spend and when we will spend it, so that keeps us on track and keeps us within budget. Section 3 within the table of number 3, high-level questions, has the organisation identified and deployed the capability it needs in the area? Referring to section 7, this is now green because both the security team within ICT and the information governance teams are appropriately resourced and trained. And within ICT, we not only have operational security teams, but we also have security architecture as well. If we look at the table number 4, which is more detailed areas to explore, 4.1 has gone from amber to green, and this is now rated as green due to the us looking at data classification. It's obviously something we need to have looked at in more detail. We do this now with every project and every change, and we heavily rely on a data protection impact assessment, which allows officers to go through and look at what the impact is of using data in a certain system and to do a formal risk assessment on that. 4.4, managing user privileges, has gone from amber to green. And this is now green because of procedural controls in ICT, together with the fact that we have a new tool set in the Microsoft Azure cloud, which allows us to more granularly control in a more granular fashion the access rights and privileges of users. We also have a new one, which is more about who's been doing what. So we review this regularly to make sure that we are still within control. They are the only changes from the previous report, which was presented to this committee in July last year. And the recommendation, as there's no further remedial action and all controls are now assessed as green, it's recommended that NCC be regarded as compliant with the National Audit Office Cybersecurity, and this item be marked as.
Thank you, Mark. I believe we've lost you, Mark, at the moment. I formally move the recommendations, which are included on page 137 of the agenda pack. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Chairman.
Would anyone like to speak? No. Well, we'll move to the vote on the recommendations included on page 137 of the agenda pack, which state that the committee agrees that the council can now be assessed as compliant with the National Audit Office's cyber security requirements. And 2, that the committee considers whether any further actions or information are required on this issue. Keith, could you please go to the count?
Yes, certainly. Councillor Nicky Brooks.
4.
Councillor Steve Carr.
4.
Councillor Kate Fall.
4.
Councillor John Handley.
4.
Councillor Errol Henry.
4.
Councillor Kevin Rostance.
4.
Councillor Phil Rostance.
4.
Councillor Andy Sissons.
4.
Councillor Keith Walker.
4.
And Councillor Martin Wright.
4.
Again, thank you, Chair. That's carried unanimously.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Mark. It's a good news story and something that I think we've got to keep on top of, and no doubt things will keep changing in this area. So thank you very much indeed, Mark. I don't know what planet you were speaking from, but some of it was very, very interesting on my screen anyway. So it was yes, your lips weren't in sync with your with the words, but thank you very much, Mark, and keep us updated. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Agenda item 12.
Thank you. Will do.
Thank you, Mark. Local Government Association consultation on draft model member code of conduct. Could I hand over to Heather Dickinson, please, to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chairman. So this is, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, remiss of me not to be polite. This is a report that is obviously to consider the Council's response to the Local Government Association consultation on their new draft model code of conduct. Members of committee will probably remember that the Committee on Standards in Public Life set out their findings on local government ethical standards and set out some 26 recommendations, and committee had a report back on that. I think it was May 2019. One of their recommendations was for the LGA to create a model code to try and bring about consistency across the country, but also so that the code should be capable of local adaptation. So the draft code is set out in full at Appendix 1, and the LGA are seeking views on this through their period of consultation that ends in the middle of August, and they've posed a number of specific questions. So we've set out the entire questionnaire that they've put to councils and to anyone else who might be interested, and that's at Appendix 2, and we'd welcome your feedback on that document. We've obviously approached the report from the perspective of officers, but we've also tried to think about how this may be perceived by the public, who obviously might want to use it to bring complaints about conduct, but also, of course, how it affects members themselves. I don't propose to go through every part of the proposed response that's in the questionnaire, and the report has highlighted quite a number of issues which might be of interest, particularly to members. And so I thought I'd just highlight a few of those at this stage, and then obviously we're keen to hear committee's views. So the first thing I thought might focus on was the concept of civility, which is different to what we've had in previous codes. So a lot of codes have the concept of respect, but they're now talking about a concept of civility. And what we've suggested in the response here is that a bit more clarity is required, because alongside the concept of civility, there is the idea that members could be judged to be acting in their official role if they may have given the impression that they are acting in their official role. We thought that sounded a bit subjective and could give rise to quite a lot of disagreement between various parties, and we thought it would be better if there was a bit more clarity around that. Also, in terms of civility as a concept in itself, we thought that was quite a broad word to use, and it may capture quite a lot of fairly minor incivilities. You know, what's incivil to one person might be perfectly normal to another. So again, we thought some sort of threshold, or maybe some other sort of way of defining what civility means would be helpful within the code. However, we did recognise that there should really be some way of capturing what might be perceived as persistent low-level infringements. The next one I thought I'd pick out was about bullying and harassment. That was one of the key things that the Committee on Standards in Public Life wanted to give more scope for within a new code to make sure that that was covered off. Our view on that was that it didn't appear to have any specific reference to discrimination, and we thought the current wording seemed rather limited in its scope. Another key issue that the LGA are interested in feedback on is this around the use of social media. So the response there is about whether we think there's, well, the question that's posed is about, do members think that there is sufficient reference to social media within the body of the code itself? We thought there probably wasn't quite enough, but if you put everything in the code, then it makes it a very long document, so then it's a bit unwieldy for people to manage. So we thought probably you could do with a bit more in the code itself, and then some more detail in an appendix, probably alongside a sort of specimen social media policy for members, which we understand that the National Body for Local Government Lawyers is currently looking at drafting one of those. So we thought that might be a useful thing to put inside the code as well once it's available. The other thing that the code does in relation to social media is create a presumption that whenever members are on their social media platforms, they will always be acting in an official capacity. In the draft response, we've suggested that that could be potentially unfair and maybe invasive to members' privacy, because it then means that whenever you're doing anything, if you're talking amongst you know, a smaller group about something entirely personal, members would be presumed to be acting in an official capacity. So we're suggesting a compromise that there perhaps should be a threshold or a proportionality test that might assist with deciding whether or not members, when they're on social media, should be caught by the code in those particular instances. Another key thing for members, obviously, is when you're in committee meetings and the declarations of interest that you have to make. The proposal there is to broaden out the scope of the declarations that you'd have to make to include family members and close associates, and also to include categories of sort of third-party bodies like our outside bodies, where members may have been appointed to sit on those on behalf of the council. So in our proposed response there, we're suggesting again that there should be more clarity and definition of what exactly a close associate or family member would be, and also that we're suggesting that outside body appointments should be a different class of interest, so not like a disclosable pecuniary interest, but some other sort of class of interest which members would declare but then be able to stay in the meeting and vote. I suppose finally, the thing that would be helpful to have will be members' views on the overall feel of the document, the way it's presented, and whether you think it's going to be readily easy to use both by members, officers who might have to look into allegations, and also the public, whether they will be able to understand it and navigate it in a way that is easy for them. So the recommendations are on the final page of the report, and they are for committee to consider the responses proposed, to approve the general content, but then with the delegation to the monitoring officer to finalise the detailed drafting in consultation with the chairman. I'm just wondering whether that should be widened out to say all the vice chairman of the committee. So thank you very much, Chairman. I think it's, I'm happy to take questions, but I suppose the issue is to get the debate from the members now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions. I formally move the recommendations, which are included on page 142 of the agenda pack. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second that, Chairman.
Can I call upon Councillor Carr to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quite one or two things here about the document. Well, first of all, I welcome it because again, it's one of these things where a lot of councils have all got different varying forms of code of conduct. And again, it would be good for councils to have similar, or not entirely the same, because there are local differences from one council to another, but broadly they're the same. I do agree with Heather that we need some clarification in regards to close associate, but I do welcome the broadening of the declaration of interests. I think that would be very helpful. I also think it's important that that all councillors' interests with regards to property that they own be seen to the public as well. So there's that one. Civility. Well, actually, quite pertinent, really. I think the last full council we had wasn't very civil, to say the least, and I would welcome a return to civility on all sides. We can disagree with each other, and we can vocally disagree with each other without being personal, which is very, very important. But again, a definition of what civil is would be helpful, because civility to one person isn't necessarily civil to another. So, you know, a definition with regards to that from the LJ would be very, very useful. I am very concerned, because I'm quite active on social media, that anything that I put on social media will be construed as being in my role as a county councillor. I don't think that's on, especially if you saw some of my jokes that I put on social media to keep everybody happy during the pandemic. They're not dirty, but you know, people might think it's frivolous for a county councillor putting jokes on social media. Well, we're people as well as county councillors, aren't we, at the end of the day? And really, about the complaints process against a councillor as well. This hasn't happened to me under the any monitoring officer here at the county council, but it has happened under a monitoring officer at another council. I had what appeared to be a vexatious complaint made against me, and it took 6 months for it to be dealt with. So we must ensure that there is a time scale for dealing with any complaints against councillors, whether it be by a member of the public or another councillor. And also we need to be seen that appropriate action is being taken. And I shan't talk about the specifics of this case because it wouldn't be fair, but actually leaving it up to the business manager of the group that the councillor is in to make a decision, to me, isn't the right thing to do. It needs to be independent. So that's all I would say on it.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. I think we're all in agree with you with civility, etc. Councillor Martin Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up a couple of points that Steve has just recently made. Civility. I don't think many of us need reminding of the lack of civility we've had in recent meetings at Nottinghamshire County Council. I was absolutely disgusted at the last full council. Yes, a better definition of civility would be very good. But at the end of the day, if you're found guilty of lack of civility, what's the punishment? What do we do to people who show this council up? Very little, as far as I'm aware. I mean, I've heard nothing about any anything happening to certain people. So that's one point. My second point is that social media. We can all say things on social media as Martin Wright or Councillor Martin Wright. If I've got two accounts, one being Councillor Martin Wright, and I say something derogatory about the council or about anybody for that matter, that's one thing. If I'm Martin Wright, layman, man of the parish and all that, I can surely say what I like as long as I don't tell people that I'm a councillor. Could anybody answer that question for me?
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Nikki Brooks. Nikki.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I'm not a fan of the model member code of conduct as it's been sent around. I don't think it reads particularly well. I'm just not particularly impressed by it, and I'm not sure that it's. I think what we've got currently is probably stronger. but I agree with the comments that have been made in the responses. However, could I just draw your attention to question 3 in Appendix 2? Is that correct that we've marked both personal tense and passive tense? I don't know whether I've just read this wrong. Was it supposed to be one or the other?
Shall I answer that?
Yes, please, Heather.
Yes, we did deliberately put both in because we thought that was a matter really for members rather than for officers. I mean, there's 2 schools of thought, we thought. On the one hand, if a member's reading it, having it in the personal tense makes it sound stronger. I will do this, and you realise it's about yourself. But obviously it's more than just members who use the code. So it's officers and it's also members of the public. So you could argue it the other way, and that it should say councillors should. It's difficult. It's a 50-50. But any sort of strength of views one way or the other, it would be good to know, and then we can cross one of them off.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Nikki. Councillor Kate Fole.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Nikki and some others on this one. I don't think this really adds an awful lot. I mean, the rule of thumb to me would be, given some of the behaviour that we've seen in the council chamber recently, and some of the behaviour more broadly amongst members, how would this code of conduct help us to tackle that? You know, how would it enable good practice amongst councillors? And I don't think it does. I don't think it adds anything or enables that process to take place. So I was a bit disappointed with it, and certainly I agree with a lot of your responses, Heather. I mean, civility. I mean, I don't think it helps. I mean, I would have put to a small extent, to be honest with you, rather than think you've been a bit too kind there. But you know, I really don't think this adds anything. If we really want to recommend, encourage, enable councillors to behave sensibly in a way that actually brings the council into good repute rather than disrepute, I don't think this helps much.
Thank you, Kate. I'm going to ask Councillor Steve Carr, and then I'll ask at the end for Heather to sum up with all the input that she's getting. Thank you, Steve.
Just to point out to Kate, it isn't in this particular document, but if you do go onto the LGA site, there is a recommendation on there that there will be a new sanction to the council, which is that a councillor can be suspended for a period of time, up to 3 months, I think it said. I might be wrong there, which we haven't got at the moment. And I honestly, I totally agree with you, Kate, that the code of conduct, and it's the same for all councils, there is just no bite in it anymore. But I think this is an attempt to actually address that situation. But, you know, they've done it bit by bit rather than going for the whole of it.
Thank you, Steve. Any further speakers before we ask Heather to sum up, please? No, Heather, I think you've got some notes there to take and to feedback and etc. If you can sum up on what's been said today, much appreciated.
I'll do my best. So, I mean, one of the key things that's obviously come through there is about sanctions. And I think that has been a criticism that's been made of the current regime. In order for us to have a different approach to sanctions, we'd have to have primary legislation. So that's probably why it isn't front and centre in this consultation, because the government hasn't yet responded on the elements of the committee's recommendations that related to them, rather than this very specific one that related to the Local Government Association drafting a model code. But in the code on page, I think it's page 7, there's a section there, so that's Appendix 1, page 7. There's a part about what they call the internal resolution procedure, which is effectively how you deal with complaints. And towards the bottom there are the series of numbers of what they call an escalating way of dealing with different complaints that are made. 7 and 8 relates to potentially having a bar on chairing advisory or special committees for up to 2 months, and also a bar on attending committees for up to 2 months. It's unclear why they've just picked out special and advisory committees, because they're not something there's a great deal of, I wouldn't have thought. But and then at the top of the next part of that page, it talks about barring members from contact with individuals where it affects an employee. So there's a number of additional sanctions, you're quite right, Councillor Carr, that are in the air, but we don't know whether they'll go forward or not at all at this stage, because we don't know how government's going to respond to the report. So at this stage, they're just asking for our comments on any of the above. And if anybody wanted to drop me a line with any thoughts after the committee, I'm more than happy to sort of consider those as well. But members are also able to put in their own individual comments if they feel that what we've wrapped up here isn't sufficient and doesn't cover everything. So I think that covered a couple of points. I think Councillor Wright was concerned about the punishment, and Councillor Carr mentioned that, as well as did Councillor Fole. In terms of how it reads, I would agree it's quite a clumsy document. I don't personally like the way it's in two parts. You have to scroll up and down the screen all the time if you're reading it online. But also we thought it generally lacked clarity for everybody and could lead to even more discrepancies between the complainant, the person complained of, and then officers being stuck in the middle trying to interpret it all the time, which isn't very helpful. The term civility, there is a definition in there, but it's just a general explanation of what the word civility means, so it doesn't give any parameters to it. So you don't know, there's nothing about scale, which is why we thought perhaps some sort of proportionality test or threshold would be helpful, so that if you're just, you know, doing something, you step out of line once in a minor way, that's not going to create a whole raft of complaints from people who might be so minded. I think that covers most of the points that were raised, but please
I think it does, Heather. Thank you. If anyone wants to contact Heather with regard anything they think of afterwards, I think we're all in the conclusion that it lacks teeth and lacks bite and lacks clarity of what will happen if people don't adhere to them. We'll now move to the vote on the recommendations included on page 142 of the agenda pack, which request that members 1. Note the content of the draft model member code of conduct and consider the responses to be submitted to the LGA as part of the consultation programme. And 2. Approve the general content of the consultation responses and authorise the monitoring officer to finalise the detailed drafting of the response in consultation with the chairman prior to submission to the LGA. Again, I'll ask Keith to read members' names out to take the vote. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Chair. Again, starting with Councillor Nikki Brooks.
4.
Councillor Steve Carr.
4.
Councillor Kate Fole.
4.
Councillor John Handley.
4.
Councillor Errol Henry.
4.
Councillor Kevin Rostance.
4.
Councillor Phil Rostance.
4.
Councillor Andy Sissons.
4.
Councillor Keith Walker.
4.
And Councillor Martin Wright.
4.
Thank you, Chair. Again, carried unanimously.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Heather, for the work you put into this. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, members, for joining in with the debate. Agenda item 13, the work programme. This is just basically to hand over to the Chief Officer to introduce the work programme.
Do you want me to do it? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the work programme. I think things have been carried forward from that we've missed, and also updated. If there are any additional items or changes members want to make, there's quite a lot on there, certainly in September, so we might have to have a look at that. But any changes or additional things people would want to propose?
I just think we ought to welcome our new member in the Boston's household.
All right.
Yes.
Keep her away any longer. Sorry, she's been itching to come on all afternoon.
Yes, that's my my beautiful granddaughter. You can sing me happy birthday on Thursday. Thank you. No, if there's no further, thank you all for your time and patience this afternoon, and thank you for bearing with me during this meeting, this first virtual meeting of governance ethics. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Enjoy your meeting at Broxtowe, Steve, and the rest of you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Kevin.